Well, hello, good
Oh,
afternoon.
that's a deep one.
My name's Matt Hagman. This is, I think it's fair to say, a pretty anticipated talk, as there are a few companies, it's hard to think of any companies in the world that people want to know more about right now and know so little about than Magic Leap. And so it's a great honor and privilege to have Rony Abovitz, the founder of Magic Leap and the CEO of Magic Leap, here, along with Jean-Marie Bardet, the Dean of the University of Miami School of Engineering, where Rony is an alum. Yes. So we want to cover a couple of areas in the 30 minutes that we've got. One, to talk about this new technology. Two, talk, of course, about Magic Leap. And three, talk about Miami's growth as a center of innovation. But before doing any of that, of course, we want to get the latest on Magic Leap. And it was at the beginning of this year, Rony authored a blog post talking about 2017 would be a really big year for Magic Leap. So as a starter, Rony, want to know, where do things stand as Magic Leap marches towards shipment of its first product?
Sure. So a couple things I'll share. Some things we'll still leave for future surprise. Number one, we moved into our factory. It's in South Florida. We took over a big piece of Motorola's old campus. So our factory is built and up and running, and one of the production lines is active every day. I was actually just in it wearing a full clean room bunny suit, which was kind of awesome, spending time with the team. We are making things that, if you saw it, looks like a shipping unit on almost all levels. Is something that you would be getting when you buy one, but there's still, if you think about like our mission control, we have to pass hardware, software, full operational readiness, number of applications still in process, but everything looks like if we were like at NASA and you were looking inside the big hangar, you'd see a rocket sitting on the launch pad, the doors starting to open, and people fueling, and there's like the beginning of that. We've also opened up our private access dev portal. A lot of folks have applied to become developers. Basically, July, August, September, we're going to increase the amount of those people. We really want to make sure we're learning how to serve developers and creators properly first before we continue to open the access. So, but it's up and running and live, and we're supporting all kinds of cool engines as well as our own software development environment. So these things are happening. So I'll stand by what I wrote. 2017 is going to be a really big year.
And for people in the audience who are actually interested, you mentioned reaching out to beginning to engage in developers. How does that work? Do you find them? Do they find you?
Right now, a lot of folks are finding us. But what Magic Leap is doing, we're thinking of our first outing into the world for creators. We have a broader definition than developers. So a lot of artists and filmmakers and musicians are showing up at Magic Leap all the time out of their own volition. We have all kinds of brands and companies and kids in a garage to more traditional developers who may be familiar with like Unity, Unreal, or C#. So it's a mix, and I think embracing wider creator community is really what we're all about. I think we're building a computer completely for creativity and creative expression, which is less than what you would think about for a computer that just did spreadsheets. It's a whole different model. And the idea that if you're a creator and you sink your teeth into what we're building, a lot of ideas that you might have you want to express in film or music or some other medium, it seems to be a really wonderful medium for that creative expression and sort of give you something chewy on. So that's a good take on it.
And the product, when we see what it looks like when it comes out, if you can sort of share what that would be and how much something like that might cost.
Right, so the category we're in, and I'm looking at how the marketplace is shaping up, there's sort of virtual reality. I could say firmly we're not VR. And VR is sort of beginning to get defined quite well by like the phone in front of your thing, like a cardboard or some other kind of headset that has like a cell phone type display that blocks out the world. We're not that, and I think people are beginning to understand what VR is. AR is really beginning to take hold with all the toolkits that are coming out for phones, like Pokemon style things on your phone. And I think the consumer and a lot of developers are associating AR with the phone. We're actually pretty happy with that. It kind of gives you a It's like looking through the doorway at some future world through the door of your phone, but it really isn't experientially or technically very similar to what we're doing. I think what we're doing is a new class of computing. You can think of it as spatial and ambient, where it's contextually aware. You could be hands-free. You're not holding up a phone looking through a video display. It's a totally different kind of experience. So we think of it as like we're using our digital light field to create a personal computer that has, it's ambient in that it's like always around you, always understanding what you see, it sees, what you hear, it hears, where you are, it is. So it's contextually aware. And that's a completely different way to think about computing design than a phone for VR or a phone for AR. So we're really happy those things are happening because they're kind of like gateways to begin to change thinking from like flat world. But Magic Leap is really designed for this spatial ambient world we live in. And you don't live inside a screen, you don't look at a screen all day, you just live in this big spatial world, lots of people, and you're contextually aware. So we're trying to build a computer that really force that computer to act like people act and understand your world without you having to tell it all the time. So we're pushing in a really different, interesting direction, we think.
So when we say VR, virtual reality, AR, augmented reality, so you actually call Magic Leap, is it?
I think if you're getting really
reality?
technical,
Yeah.
I think spatial computing or spatial ambient computing powered by a digital light field, because augmented reality is like the idea of looking through a video display, but it doesn't really deal with all the rest of the computing and sensing that's going on. We involve a lot of perception and sensing, sound field. We've got machine learning in our sensors. There's a whole awareness that really ties well into having a digital light field wafer that allows you to experience the world very naturally. So it's kind of we think we're creating an interesting new category. So, mixed reality is a term, I think, for lack of a better word, a lot of people jumped onto. Now it's being like commingled with like VR things are called mixed reality, and it feels slightly mixed up. So I like spatial computing with the digital light field. It says much more accurate relative to the kind of system we're building.
And you said that the rocket is you can see it there. The doors are opening. When it ultimately sort of wheels and is set on the launch pad, if you could just speak to what will something like this cost for everyone here in the audience to have.
So one thing I won't give you today, Matt, is I won't give you pricing today. When we do output pricing, we want to be like, that's the price and that's that. I will tell you it's being priced for affordability on, call it mass premium consumer-based device. And there are a lot of things you buy that are more expensive than Magic Leap in that sort of mass consumer electronics category, and there are some things that are less. So I think we're in the zone that if you're willing to pay for a premium mass consumer device, you'd be happy with us. As a reference point, it's not a Kindle. It's not a Kindle kind of pricing, but it's also not unobtainable and not like in the upper atmosphere. So I think a lot of people will be able to get their hands on it, and we want you to either want it at the beginning or you'll be a future customer at some point. So.
And would also just, there's been news about raising another round. For background, Magic Leap, Wired magazine called the hottest startup in the world. And in fact, among startups, Magic Leap, I can't think of another startup that's raised as much money as Magic Leap raised, $1.4 billion. And there's been press reports about actually raising another round. If you could speak to that as best you can.
So I'll do two things. For any entrepreneur in the audience, one thing to get used to is you never stop being in the mode of talking to investors, talking to investment bankers. My last company, we did that in the early days, going public, and even after going public, you never stop. So you're always in conversation with investors, you're always in conversation with bankers, and you're always looking to see if there's a good fit. And it just never stops. So that's an endless thing, and it's just an ongoing process, almost like breathing. Even if you're profitable, even if you're generating a ton of revenue, there's still like expansion and scale and things you might want to consider. So Magic Leap will always be in that mode of like wanting to hear from positive long-term investors who like our space. We're also, launch is not far away, and we're looking at what does the world look like after launch, and through what happens next. If you look at the formative stages of a startup, you launch, you go commercial, And then there's all sorts of things to do, like when we go outside the U.S., when we do Europe or China or India and Brazil, like all those things, you want to constantly talk to investors and know that you've got more dry powder for that expansion if things are going well. But we'll be U.S. first, but definitely not U.S. only. So we want to constantly look at, like, if things are going well and if we're getting good feedback, how quickly can we scale and when? And we're thinking of our first time out as learning how to swim. You know, you want to swim no faster than you should be. And a good way to put our company to everyone's mind is we're like the kid going into the pool with the floaties, learning how to swim carefully. But as soon as we're feeling confident with developers and creators and consumers that all the engines are working well, we're just going to go faster and faster in the deep end. And I think that's a good approach for any company.
Now, just as a quick note here, so our timer here isn't...
time has stopped.
Time has stopped. So, and we'll just keep talking. So,
did you make that happen?
No, I did not.
You went to
whoever's
Caltech, though,
keeping
right?
Time, just let me know when we're getting close to the end of our time. Oh, now we have time.
That's probably what our project
Unfortunately,
team feels
yeah.
like. We just lost 10 minutes.
So, Dean, I want to turn to you as we're listening to this new world with the School of Engineering. How do you approach education when things like this are happening and changing so quickly?
Well, first I'll have a disclaimer. I don't have any financial interest in the company, it's Rony's company. But I was fortunate to visit the company and try the device, one of the prototypes. And I knew that it was a disruptive technology. But when I actually experienced it, I really validated that statement. It's really disruptive. And it's really what's disruptive is how the device interacts with you, with the brain. And that's actually a frontier in science and engineering to kind of better understand the brain. And Rony's technologies is really a breakthrough. And so when I visited that company, Rony made me thought, gave me some, raised some big questions. How, as a research university, how a college of engineering could actually help Rony's technologies? Maybe how can we provide the engineers to help Rony swim faster? And this is actually I think a very provoking dialogue, I think, between Rony and I. And Rony has been raising a lot of very interesting questions. I think the major challenge is that we have now to create programs so that we educate to innovate. That our degree are such that or students, when they get their degree, they're just not after getting a job, but they are here to create jobs for others. And that's really quite of a shift in the philosophy, I think, of a College of Engineering.
Sort of educating lifelong learners in a way. Yeah.
That's correct. And Rony and I, we've been talking about these micro courses. Rony is converging so many technologies. It's amazing. Our iPhone is a convergence of many, many technologies, from the GPS to databases, internet, and so on. All these technologies have converged. Rony's device is even a more convergent set of technologies.
I think every one of your departments in engineering, we probably have engineers doing right now.
That's right. He can hire from all over the field of engineering. And so that creates a new challenge for us, educators and researchers. So it's great to have this partnership between industry and universities. Rony is challenging us, and he's giving us a window to the future.
I hope they become the Stanford of the South.
Yeah, that we can all live. President Frank is right down here, so we all hope that becomes the
So
Stanford
no
of the
pressure
South.
on the dean, right?
No pressure.
No pressure on the dean.
No pressure.
No pressure.
No pressure.
MIT of the South, cool too.
That MIT of the South would do great. So and by the way, in full disclosure, I have not seen the technology, so I don't have the benefit of the dean of having seen what
Actually,
Magic
you did,
Leap
but we did a
did.
brainwave.
Ah, okay. Did you all hear that?
Did I say that out loud?
So talk about this future where, we see all these different emerging technologies, the ones that, what you're bringing forward with Magic Leap, and all these other technologies that will grow sort of at an exponential rate. Our lives will be much different 5 to 10 years. Talk a little bit about what that potentially looks like and what actually your concerns are.
Sure. So if I was any entrepreneur in the audience, if I was like me coming out of college right now, I would be paying a lot of attention to, like intense attention to AI, machine learning, deep learning. There's no doubt. I would be looking at photonics and sensing, all sorts of sensing in an incredible way. The world will be alive with sensors. There's no doubt that's happening. I would also find a inward ethical path, because if you do any of these things, you want to point in a direction that tries to better people, better yourself. All these technologies, they're agnostic. They don't have ethics or morality. We have to put that into our tech and how we move that forward. This is like one of those times in humanity where you can move down dangerous paths, or we could do great things. We could amplify people, or we could replace them. Everyone in the audience can be part of that decision-making process. You will be replaced by AI and computing, or you'll be amplified by that, and you'll be much more empowered. So either pick a path where you're empowering people and you're trying to like unite and unify what's going on with people, or you're going to like just replace millions of people with a piece of tech. And I don't think it's good enough anymore for engineers to say, I don't have to worry about the left side or the right side of the brain. I'm only one of them, engineer or scientist. You need to be both sides. There's no way you can innovate without being both sides, and you can't just say, everything will be okay, we'll just throw it in the air. So I think ethics, morality come into a deep play in the next decade, and as an entrepreneur, you really need to think about that.
And and you've talked about a people-first ethic. Is that?
We're completely people-first. Everything we're building is about how to amplify you as an individual, not replace you. In fact, I think we're going to hopefully be an antidote to the vast amount of AI and machine learning that will probably, if I look at this room, could be half the jobs gone, in 10 to 15 years, replaced by software and data centers. And not the jobs you think that'll be replaced. A lot of knowledge workers and software engineers will find themselves just completely gone because some algorithm just does your work. Actually, the person like cooking waffles at Waffle House might be okay because actuation is not moving as fast as computation and GPU. So I would definitely pay really close attention to that and have like an internal sense of ethics. And I think science and engineering needs to bind those things together much more than I sort of self did that, but you have to think like, am I doing good for the local region? Am I doing good for the country I'm in, and more globally in what you're doing? You can't just think I'm just going to make a lot of capital. I think those days where you don't worry about your impact is not, those days should be over, hopefully.
So when launching Magic Leap, and as many of you know in the audience, Rony previously built a more than $1 billion company, which he sold.
Maurice?
With Maurice Ferre Jr. But you chose to launch Magic Leap here. And you've talked a lot about how you see Miami in South Florida as increasingly in its own right as a center of innovation, and certainly with a great promise going forward. Talk about your decision to do it here, which I'm sure your investors, including the likes of Google and Alibaba, might have pushed back a little bit on. I'm guessing they did.
Right, so I definitely see South Florida, Miami as like a center of, I've been discussing with the dean and others, it's a hemispherical pull. If you're in Latin America, the Caribbean, parts of Europe, parts of the Southeast United States, like this can become a hemispherical hub, and I think it is on some level. Early on, I enjoyed the white space, and to be really clear and blunt, I didn't know any better. I was born in Cleveland, came here as a kid, and didn't realize you shouldn't start tech companies in South Florida. But once you do, and you have like the lack of noise that you find sometimes in the West Coast and groupthink, you have this ability to think clearly and freely and innovate, maybe better than when you go to a place where there's a ton of people. The other thing is there are now really amazing things happening. eMerge conference, what's going on in Wynwood Design District. Dean's definitely raising the bar what's happening in diversity, and I think the president's doing as well. So there's a lot of really great things. Also, other universities are all trying to raise the bar. So I think for the first time since growing up here, there's like not quite a critical mass, but almost of like it's a scene that's about to start to happen, like maybe Seattle just before grunge. Like there's something going on, and it's real. It's like when I started Mako, it was like I felt like alone in a raft, by myself. And if I was starting it today, it wouldn't feel like that at all. Yeah. There's definitely movement and energy, and it's cool, and it's like open-ended. And I just met with the head of a major media company in Latin America, and he completely validated that, like, they look at Miami like we here look at Silicon Valley. We need to start thinking like that's how lots of part of the world think about this place, and make it real. Like give entrepreneurs the chance, get seed venture funds here, mix it up, try and fail.
If we could, in terms of building your company here, how many employees do you have right now in South Florida?
So
thereabouts, ballpark.
So Magic Leap overall is over 1,000 people. I think we're just pushing over 800 in
800 here.
800 in South Florida.
Now, in terms of building that sort of talent here, how did you do it?
It's a combination of things, and I hope what we could do going forward is a little bit different. We have been bringing people in, super talented people, paying them really competitive salaries and giving them lots of options from all over the world. So they're like setting roost here in South Florida, people from the West Coast and East Coast and Europe and everywhere, from Brazil. And so now we're bringing like a brain trust here that will at some point, spin out their own startups. But I do hope like the universities start churning out top-notch engineers and innovators who want to stay here. Because a lot of the really bright people, they just take off. They go to Boston, They go to New York, they go to San Francisco. They don't think you can actually do anything here. And hopefully they realize maybe they have a better shot because they could stand out. There's a thing called a plane where you can fly and have a meeting on Sand Hill Road and come back. And maybe we broke the back that you don't have to be 10 miles away from a fund in Sand Hill Road to get funded.
Yeah.
And Miami needs its own capital infrastructure that's as cool as Sand Hill Road, and need to make it happen here. So
if I may, Rony, you have a very good point. I mean, if you look all around the world, there are no great innovation ecosystem without a comprehensive research university to support that ecosystem. So if you look at Boston, MIT, that's obviously the biotech. If you look at Palo Alto, Stanford, you can see the relationship between the innovation ecosystems and a comprehensive research university or system of comprehensive research universities. So it's very important for us to support that innovation ecosystem. It's our duty as University of Miami to, and I'm sure other universities are going to help us to make this innovation ecosystem rich. So we have all these innovators which are going to join forces and are going to be either working for Rony or working for other companies. So I think now we have a symbiosis. We live together and we are going to partner and prosper together.
Yeah.
So it's a great time to be now in Miami.
It really is.
Speaking about an interesting opportunity in the ecosystem, we're building a platform that could serve millions of creators to build businesses, to serve billions of people. And I would say it's a class of platform. Magic Leap won't be the only company ever doing what we're doing. We hope to be a leader in it. But there's an opportunity to be one of those millions. And maybe in those millions, like you're the next Snapchat, you're the next Facebook. The wars over phone and tablet and PC, they're not quite over, but they're largely over. The completely Wild West is this new form of computing that's going to be coming out. And I think there's opportunities to create like thousands or hundreds of thousands of cool startups, some of whom will define the next few decades of computing in the economy. So don't look back, look forward.
Yeah. And will this new form of computing primarily be through eyewear?
I think we need, like our form in doing, call it spatial computing is on you. It's meant to be light and with you at some point all day, every day, everywhere. But the idea of ambient spatial computing, think about what's happening in different parts of the home and sensing is really not only in the form factor we're building. There's an entire ecosystem of hardware, software, services, data center work. Once you wrap your mind around like where computing's going, there's tons of cool opportunities. Again, most people are looking back. They go, how do I become Facebook? Those guys didn't look backwards. They were looking forwards and imagining the next 10 or 15 years. Yeah. By the way, you need imagination. If you don't have imagination, probably don't be an entrepreneur. But if you have imagination, you need to build a story of what the world looks like and go make it happen.
So if I may just, I'm going to go to China, 16 hours travel. It's dreadful. And so I can imagine if I had Rony's device, I could actually, instead of seeing a little screen about that size, I could see an IMAX. I could be actually in the middle of a prairie or in the Rockies. I don't need the space anymore. I could actually dream right here in a confined space and make my travel, the 16 hours, just like a charm.
So with that in mind, we have 1 minute left.
Yeah.
So Rony, just walk us through sort of one use case. I mean, the Dean was doing that a little bit. I mean, I know you've talked about looking at a sweater and with the Magic Leap device being able to sort of buy it on the spot. Walk us through what an experience.
I think really cool one is think about like being a mom or dad. You got kids running around your kitchen and living room, and you've got no hands-free, but like you have, you got your cooking show, you got your CNBC or BBC, whatever you're watching, but you also have this like ability to sense where all your kids are, what's happening. There could be an incoming trajectory, 3-year-old about to touch that dangerous thing, alert. Somebody calls you, you just look and say hi. Your grandmother like shows up in like something right out of a science fiction movie and looks you eye and smiles. And you say, can you go watch the kids for a second? She's like, sure. And the kids are like hanging out with grandma. There's a lot of really, really cool things about life. And one of the things we're trying to do is like solve a life problem. Like, what do you do in the kitchen? What do you do in breakfast? And how do normal people integrate like what seems like a science fiction future, like a Disney World's Fair kind of thing, but in your world? And it's going to happen. It's going to come soon. Like, we all have like a phone in our pocket. In Star Trek days, that was totally science fiction. Now we don't even blink an eye. So, we're trying to make science fiction real.
Well, we can't wait to see what comes next. Dean, Rony, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.